Alright, to answer a few of y'all's questions maybe about planning and some of the details here. I'm horrible at drawing, and so I'm just going to walk you through my thought process, as crappy as it is. But as a general rule, I kind of think about when I started out, what I've done is, I mean, there's some calculators online, like on hammock forums, you can look up like top quilt calculators, and basically they're spreadsheets that use some basic math to look at each baffle you create, and it'll kind of, they might list out for each baffle how much down you want after you put in the height of the baffle, the height of the endpoint baffles, the overall length and width, the fill power of the down you're putting in, and it'll kind of spit out for you how much down you'll put in each baffle and some other things. So once you can do that. I find to be a little more simple, because I end up forgetting what link I was supposed to use or whatever, is just think about my end result. In the case of my quilt, it's 86. I was going for 86 by 49 with a baffle height of 2.25. So when I was planning this, kind of thinking about how much down is the first question, I guess. I mean, and thinking about volume and all that stuff, is that I kind of think about it generally as a big cube, or to calculate volume. So although the ends, I don't box up the ends of my top quilt. It's just unnecessary work, I feel like. It's not, you'll take a little bit of loss of volume on the edges, and therefore loft or whatever. But you're just kind of finishing off the edges anyway, and it's a lot of work to box off the edges. So I just don't do that. Yeah. So I mean, it would be easy. It just creates complication. So I don't do that. So what I do instead is, instead of having like cubes all the way, like this is sort of looking down the full length of the baffles, ends like kind of like you're looking inside from the end. Instead of having a square at the end, I think about the end as a triangle, and we know how to calculate the volume of a rectangle: length times width times height, and you can get it. You can go online on Google and type in a triangular prism volume, and it gives you all the math. You just put in a few of these variables: your baffle height, the length of this, which is the width of all your other ones, or you can do it however you want, but you put that length of this and it'd be the same on both sides. And then I forget what else it asks you, but it'd be easy enough to put that information and it'll spit out a volume for you. Whatever you get as your volume of any of these individually or collectively, you just do volume divided by fill power, and you get how much down. I then multiply it times 1.1, which will give you a 10% overstuff. And you could do 1.2. I'm still experimenting with how much overstuff I want. So you could do 0. You could just leave that one without the multiplier. You'll have to experiment with it. But I did 1.1 this time. I might have did 1.2 on a previous project, and then got your thing. I haven't done tapers at all for my builds. I've just kind of kept it simple. As a new DIYer, it's like the more simple I do it, the more elegant I think I can, at least for me, the best I can do, I can get it. So I just kind of think about each one of these individually. So each one of these is, in my case, 2.25 high. I have it written out here: 86 inches long, 2.25 high, and 3.5 inches wide. I did the 3.5 inch wide baffles. Each of these were 3.5 inches between each of the segments. It's a bit narrow. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I like the look of the many longitudinal lines, and my hand can just barely fit in it. I can stuff in the down through that size. I don't highly recommend it. I think I would probably go, I think the first one I did, I had a larger loft, so I had a bigger opening, but this one was a smaller loft, so it was a cram. I think if you're going to do something like a 20-degree quilt where you're going to do 2.2 and a quarter, even 2.5, you might use a little bit wider, maybe 3 3/4 or 4 inches, even if you wanted to do that. I think a lot of people say you shouldn't go more than, say, 5. So anyway, that's just a detail. I'm not sure how critical it really is for a top quilt, so it's just more about how much time. The more you put in there, the more sewing you got to do, etc. So that's a factor, but overall, it's not too big a difference. So you do multiply your width of the baffle times the height times the length, and you'll get your volume of that particular, one of these individual cells, the baffles. And then you can divide that by your fill power, and it'll give you the ounces. Multiply that times 1.1, and that'll give you, for my case, something like 0.88 ounces. 0.88 ounces per each of these. Now, when I used that trapezoidal bit and then did the volume times 1.1, I got something like 0.47. So each of these endpoints, I had 0.47, and that's how I did it. That's the first time I used that not trapezoidal, that Google Math. It seems a little bit low in volume on this one. I mean, it's down. I might just kind of tack on a little bit more if you use that same calculation. If I could go back, I think I'd have added another 10 or 15% to that just to make the ends a little bit fluffier, but it worked okay. Let's see, you were asking me how much down did I end up using. So yeah, if you do the math, 0.88, it comes out to be 12 or 12.5 ounces, I forget now. The total mass, or the weight of it, I should say, was 21.3 ounces. That included the Argon 90 for the top and the bottom. That included the Omni tape and the cam snaps and the drawstring and the 2 cord locks for the foot box. So when you're planning it, you think about whatever this end result is, but you have to factor in how you get there. So you need like seam allowance. This has been the hard part for me as a newcomer to making these. It's kind of, so what I've done is factor in quite a bit of extra, and I'm still kind of messing it up a little bit. It's not perfect, but it works. So I recommend for the sides here for sure an extra 3 inches to and plan for that extra to do a roll hem to create a 1 inch or approximately 1 inch or shy of that seam that you can put like double or triple stitch down the sides. It'll give you room if you're going to do the Omni tape for your foot box or to sew it together or whatever you're going to do. You need some extra stuff to do with different modifiers if you want to add little things, if you want it like a ground piece or whatever. That extra material is good. Extra is good too because if you flub your cut or it's a little uneven, the shells don't match up perfectly, you might end up having to sort of improvise a little bit. And if you have extra material, you can improvise. So even if you did 4, I know it sounds crazy, 4 or 5 inches, you could always trim it off at the end. Actually, now that I've done this now a couple times, I probably would, sounds crazy, but I might cut it to like 5 inches. And then once I'm done, consider what it's looking like. Because then you can kind of, sometimes when you sew these, you'll lose a few inches in your, just from the sewing, depending on your tension in your thread. You know, from stuffing it, you might get, a little bit of shortening too, depending on how much overstuff you get. Or so, I mean, there's just things about it that come into play that I'm still figuring out for myself. So, same thing up here. I left just free material out beyond the baffles, so that was easy to make the thing. But I didn't do that for here right this time. Instead, I kind of goofed it up by putting the baffle material all the way up along with the extra seam allowance, and that created some complications on this build, and my shells didn't match up exactly perfect. I had like a 2-inch off, so it worked out fine because the extra one I had extra, I used it as my channel for the cord for the foot box. It sort of improvised it, and it looks good actually. So plenty of extra material down here. What I would probably do is like that, is just kind of include that extra material such that when you roll hem it over and down, it'll close off the baffles. So make sure it overlaps so you sew it all off and close the channels. I don't box these ends either. Like I said, it's just too much of a pain. I mean, especially if you're doing the foot box and you're cinching it, it doesn't matter. And if you're going to make a sewn-in foot box, then you can craft a foot box plug too, and that won't matter particularly in that case either, because your foot box plug will do that. Anyway, I think that was all the questions y'all had about the planning. So you just, for example, so originally my output was 86 inches by 49. So, probably what you need to cut. What I did was 92 inches, because I need 3 inches more up and down. 92 inches by 55 inches in the raw. That's raw for the shells, okay? You'll make the marks, all that stuff before you cut it. Mark all the lines for each baffle, all that, all the things. Mark your seams, mark your seam allowance too, so you have like a guide for that too when you're roll hemming it. The raw for the baffle, in my case, was an output of 2.25. I like to have 1/4 of an inch. For me, that's comfortable. 1/4 of an inch for when I'm sewing each of them. So to get 2.25, I did 2.75 as my output. If you order from Dutch, I think it's 2.5. If you do those and use 1/4, you'll get down to closer to 2. But then, with overstuff, you can still get up to 2.25, maybe even 2.5. It'll kind of shorten the width of it. And that works if you're going for 20 degree too, I think. I've never used them. I just cut my own, save the money. It's not that hard. I'll cover that in the video too. So you get all that together. Also, just as a quick pro tip, once you cut the 2 shells, lay them down on top of each other and kind of get a sense that they line up and all that before you get going. So don't make the mistake I did last time where it's kind of goofy. That's where kind of cutting that extra too. So probably, I know it sounds crazy, if I had to go back and make this one again to output it to this, I kind of would probably add an inch to some of these, maybe 2. It sounds crazy, but once I get to the end, I could always kind of trim it off. Once it's all kind of sewn together. If I get done and it's all sewn together, and I needed that extra length, I have it. And if I don't, I can trim it off with my rotor knife or whatever thing you have to cut with. So, just a few thoughts about the planning process. I think if you're starting new, go big, and then if it shortens up, you're not going to be severely disappointed. That would stink. So hopefully that answers some of y'all's questions. The sewing part is tricky. I'll talk more about that in the video too later when I'm showing it. You just have to develop a technique for it. So I'll talk more about that later. Hopefully this will answer some of the questions people had, I don't know, or confuse you worse, or just probably, I'm not like an expert at this. This is just what I've done, and it's working for me, and it's a process that works for me. So, and I'm still evolving it. As you can see, my planning process is still kind of goofy. So hopefully it'll give you some ideas, and people can give me ideas too. All right, just to show you how I started out with this top quilt project. I'm starting with my raw piece of fabric here for one of the sides. This will actually be the inner side for my buddy. He wanted blue on the inside, black on the outside. I got it taped down. I marked 55 inches raw cut to give 3 inches of seam allowance for a big roll hem on each end. We'll make a 51-inch wide end result. I'm marking my marks for the baffles, the laser level line, and then coming behind it with a straight edge and a piece of soap. Mark each of them. Once I've done with all the markings, then I'll make the cut of the extra fabric over here. There's just extra fabric. Cut that off. I'll cut the lengthwise too. Oh yeah, I just realized that. And then once I've cut the lengthwise to the right length, then I'll have my piece ready to go. I'll make the baffles and sew the baffle material onto each of the little white lines I draw for the thing. It'll be a good start. The marking and stuff is the most tedious part of this, I feel like. I haven't found a better way to do it. Last time I did this, I did a chalk level and just snapped the chalk line on each part. That actually worked pretty good, but the chalk falls off. And then I tried to ink one with hopes it would not mark just one side of the fabric, not the other, but it just soaks through. So I hadn't found a solution. I almost need like a line that can mark with something like this soap when you snap the line, and then you can just snap all the lines to be done. But this is about as fast as I can do it. This is what it looks like with all the lines marked here. Got all the lines marked off. 3.5-inch wide baffles. That's how I made my first quilt. I'm just kind of duplicating it somewhat arbitrarily, but it worked last time, and why deviate? I probably could make it a lot easier by making 4.5 inch wide baffles, but that's it. I just got to make a cut along here, and then this will be the portion of the cut here, and that will be the basics. Then I start working on the baffles. And here I cut off the excess, lop that piece off, and the top one. That makes a total width here of 55 inches. 3 inches on this side, 3 inches on this side. That'll be for the roll hem, and then 3.5 inch margins between these baffles. And I think there's 13 spaces, or 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yep. And that's it. Now we're moving on to working on the baffles. This is where I cut the baffles. I cut a 92 inch long 1 yard piece of fabric. I think it's this no-see mesh 0.67 yards per ounces per yard. I cut it to 92 inches, the full length of the raw cut of my quilt fabric, and then I sort of rolled on itself evenly at the native width and cut my sections to the width that I wanted, which I'm actually going to do 2 3/4 raw cut. That gives me a 1/4 inch seam allowance for each seam. It goes onto each of the inner and outer shells, and that's how you cut those in. You can buy them from Dutch. He sells them at 2.5. I just like to make mine a little bit bigger, give me a little bit more room, wiggle room for when I sew it onto the fabric, and give me a little bit more loft. And I just mark each side at each of the intervals, and then draw a straight line, and then I use a rotary knife on this cutting acrylic surface and cut each of them. So I got my other shell prepped, and to show you again what we did here, I have marked all my marks for my my things, including my raw cut here. 55 inches total of a 3 inch hem on each side here, and 3 inches on each hem, and then between each of these is 3.5 inches for each baffle. And I've used this big aluminum angle iron as my straight edge. It was brilliant, a lot easier. And I bought one of these big 72 inch rulers too. That's helped a lot. Go ahead and get some of those. That's been awesome. So I'm just going to cut this one out, and I'll start sewing it onto the blue one here. I'm going to show you all the basics a little bit in this video of how I go about sewing on these baffles to the material. I'm going to give you a few little pointers in the middle that, at least that I've learned, not entirely independent. Some other YouTubers and hammock forum members and people have helped me a little bit off and on. Some of the things I've had to learn on my own too. So they may or may not be applicable to you. They may be totally wrong, but I'll share them anyway, and you can see what you think. I'm going to first really quick show you what you're looking at. Is one of the shells is blue and one of them is black. And when you first start out with these projects, you start with the baffle strips. Let's say they're 2.5 or 3 inch strips. I allow for whatever the loft is. Let's say it's 2.5. You want as your final loft before over stuff. For me, I'd like to add, in addition to that, a 1/4 inch for each of these seams. So there'll be 2 seams for each of the baffles, and so that would be 3 inches. I would do. I'm sorry, no. Yeah, 3 and no, 2 and 3 inches, correct. So I'd have a 1/4 inch for each of those seams. So then, once I got those cut and laid down, when you sew it to the first shell piece before you attach the two, it's easy enough. You lay it all down, line it up. I use these lines I made before all the cuts from soap, and it just works great. White soap. Cut it into some sharp pieces and use them as pencils. And that's just what's worked best for me. And then once I get all lined up, the first one goes on pretty easy. The first one just kind of sew on. It's still not easy, but you're only managing those 2 pieces of fabric. Once you have to sew the second one on to the first one, you have to sort of manage a little bit more of the fabric. And when I first do the first strip, I'm just basically kind of show you, like there's my line. You just basically line it up with your hand or whatever. I'll show you in a minute when I do it. And you're just using the one hand to kind of hold the strip down on the position, and then just kind of follow your foot here, and you're always looking ahead. Once you have it lined up right and it's set correctly, then you only need to focus ahead of the foot. You look ahead of the foot, not at the needle, nowhere else, because if you look at the needle or you look somewhere within it, you're going to track all sideways and goofy. If you're looking ahead and letting it feed consistent, it's very easy to track and get a straight stitch. So when you did the second one, it's a little different because you're not just holding it with one hand. You have to kind of hold the fabric underneath of it like this in place because there's all this fabric in the way. And then I use my right hand, which I'll free up in a minute, and hold the baffle material down where I want it. And that kind of keeps everything pinned down, and then I can sew pretty good. So let me show you that real quick attempt to. So you can see there that what I did, and of note, I can feel under this table is one of these kind of flat tables that it's sort of recessed into the table. But even if you don't have that and it was just a hump up, you can feel the fabric here with your fingers and know that there's no other fabric under it. Because you do have to sometimes reach over here and manage it and pull from underneath it and make sure you have no fabric underneath of it, because if you did and you sewed over it, you're gonna have to get the seam ripper out and have a bunch of holes in your nice quilt. So gotta be careful about that. But for me, I can kind of visually see it and feel it. When I get it there and I know there's nothing under it, that hasn't failed me yet. So just to quickly add another tip, it's worked for me. Probably someone may disagree with this. For my machine, this has worked pretty well, and for my top quilt I made a year ago, it seems to be doing fine. I start my stitching with a lock stitch using a smaller, shorter stitch, so 1.8 or 2. It doesn't really matter, but like I usually like 1.8, and do back and forth a couple times, about 3 stitches, and that's probably even overkill. And then I actually go to my longest stitch setting on my machine, which isn't terribly long. I'll show you what it looks like here per stitch here on my longest. So there's probably, actually I can tell you how many per inch. It's probably about 5 stitches per inch, so it's a pretty long stitch. When you look at it, it's pretty good size. I actually keep the tension. I had to play with your tension before you get into your sewing. You don't want it real tense where it's like bunching up your fabric and shortening the whole seam. I actually had that happen a little bit on some of mine on this project and dialed it back a tad. So play with your tension. You don't want it so loose that your seams look sloppy. These look pretty good here. They're not too tight. They're not too loose. If they're too tight, it'll kind of tend to bunch up. So that's that little tip. Hopefully it helps. I think it doesn't hurt. I don't think if you did a 3 or a 4, it just takes even longer to sew it. And I just don't think it's really necessary. I think that one of the concerns is that a bigger stitch, the down will escape, but I think overall that is not going to happen. When you look at these seams that I've sewn here when they're done, there's nowhere for that down to go. So I think that's a concern that can be. Now, if your machine goes a lot longer than maybe 4 to 5 stitches per inch, maybe 5 stitches per inch, then I probably would say don't. Not sure if this will end up being the best way. That's the way I did it with my last quilt, but I just roll hemmed. I left seam allowance for 3 inches on each of the sides and the tops and the fronts, and I'm just going to roll hem each of these first individually, and then sew those 2 roll hems together. I turned down all the corners and sewed them down just to kind of neaten up the corners before I keep sewing. That helps to kind of make the channels and things a little bit neater as I do all that. So we'll see how that plays out. Alright, just a quick update. I have it all sewed up and ready to go. As a still new DIYer, I still find out things that I get goofy, but on this end I had like a little bit longer amount of blue on this end, which I basically did a roll hem to make a cord channel to sort of make up for that. So the strip here I folded independently of the black and created a roll hem channel that I can put the cord through and make the cinch end. And then after I did that, I did just a quick half roll hem of this one and sewed it right below that that hem. And on the sides, I did the same thing, sort of. I just did just a roll hem, just one single one in. I sewed each one independently, and then after I did that, I sewed them together twice. If that makes sense. So you have 2 layers. I did a roll hem on this layer and the roll hem on this layer, so that they're both clean edges, and then sewed them both together all the way up, leaving the top, which ended up being very perfect and flat, open. So this side's open now, so I'm ready to fill it with down. Hopefully that made sense. Some of the details as I start doing these, I sort of figure out as I go and fix my little errors and mistakes, so imperfections, but it's going to turn out really good. Kind of show you the other side there. It's looking pretty good so far. Once we get stuffed, we'll see what it looks like. It looks like it's going to be great. I'll be putting on the Velcro here, I think about 18 inches or so. Here and here, I'm about to sew that on in a minute. Fix my cam snap, one cam snap right above each of those points of the Velcro. And that'll be it. And then after I do that, I'll stuff it. Let me just show y'all really quick what I do for the down. I know a lot of people have sophisticated systems for loading the down. I started off trying different things, and this, to me, is vastly easier and not messy. Or not particularly messy, anyway. I get the shower prepped, and when I get in, I close the curtain and work inside. I'll put a little cotton balaclava over my face so I don't breathe in any down. And I'll pretty much get in here and work in my underwear, or just kind of minimal clothing, so I don't have to clean a lot of down. So what I do is right now I have these 3-ounce packages that I got from Dutch. I've gotten a big bag before too that's like a pound from downlinens.com. But essentially what I do is I turn on the thing, and I use a clear bin, like this, basically. Well, you have to have it centered, but you get the idea. And I just throw the down in, and if I leave a little area where I can read the scale, I can add in however much I need per baffle. And as soon as I'm done with it, I just get my quilt, get in there, grab it with my hands, stuff it in. It's just about making deliberate and slow movements. No puffing or anything like that. If you're actually pretty careful, you won't fly down everywhere too much. So, and then I just come back behind everything with my little Dyson vacuum, hand vac, and kind of go around and pick up any little bits. But actually, the last couple times I've done this, it really works pretty well, and I haven't had a bunch of mess all over the house or anything. So that's how I do it. And I'll try to show you all a little bit of that too. Once I stuff it in, I use some magic clips, some of these little clips here. So once I stuff the particular baffle, I put a couple of these over it, and then I keep going. And then when I'm done, I just sew up the final seam, and that's that. Okay, just to show y'all how I kind of collect it down, because I found this works really good. Once you get it all in there, I've already half filled a baffle. This is what's left. I started just get the hands in there, and you just bunch some in your hand, make a tight fist, and just start stuffing it in like that. And then you just keep doing that. And you can actually kind of compact it all down real good into your fist, so you can keep it really controlled. And it lets you kind of get up the rest of it and pack it in. There we go. That's good enough. And then you just take that ball you made, and your 2 left, stick it in there. I have pretty small baffles on this, so all the way to the bottom, and let it loose and turn off. Alright, just to show you all the final result here, and pretty happy with it. It turned out really good, I think. After I filled it all up, and it's looking to be about 2 to 2.5 inches, depending on how and where I measure it. My buddy wants it to be about 20 degrees or so, should work really good for him. Just to show you the foot box end here, you just got your tape. Just like my Jacks for Better one, I just kind of went after the same design there, and just kind of together here like that. It's got a cam snap I installed. First time I've used these, pretty nifty. And you got my 2 cord channels that I made, like that. And that's that now. And show you that there. It's good. Pretty happy with it. There's the inside. Feels great. Looks good. That's about it. It ended up being 21 ounces and a third. 21.3 ounces. It's great. Hope that helps. Any questions anyone has, let me know.